Alright, here we are looking at the skull. So we've got a plastic model of a human skull here, with each bone being a different colour. So here, from an anterior point of view, firstly towards the top, we can see the frontal bone. Now if we turn the skull so we're looking then at a lateral point of view, we can see the parietal bones here. So here's the right parietal bone, and of course there'll be a left one on the other side. Now just below the parietal bone we have here a temporal bone, and then behind the parietal bone we have an occipital bone. And if we turn the skull around, we can see that the occipital bone is actually quite large. We just couldn't see all of it from a lateral point of view. And so here it is, being that entire blue bone structure there. Now then if we come back to an anterior point of view, we can also see just below the frontal bone here, in the midline, or close to the midline, we have two nasal bones. So there's a right and a left nasal bone. Just below those we have this big purple bone here, which is the maxilla. So that's all maxilla, all that one colour. And then below that, and below the teeth, we have the mandible. Now then, if we look again at a lateral point of view, another bone that we can see here in red is the sphenoid bone. And remember, that's a strange or irregular shaped bone that runs right across the skull from right to left. So if we look from a lateral point of view on the other side, we can see it again. And then if we look into the eye socket or orbit, I'm not sure how well it's going to show up on the screen here, but there's a red bone in here, and that again is the sphenoid bone there, so visible from an anterior point of view here in the eye socket as well. And those are the bones of the skull that I wanted you to know. Now what we'll do is have a look at a few features of bones of the skull. And so for these, it's hopefully easier to use a plain white skull, and again this is a plastic model of a human skull. And what we can see from an anterior point of view, below the orbit or eye socket there's a hole here. That's the infraorbital foramen. And then if we look at a lateral point of view, we can see here at the angle of the mandible is here at the inferior aspect here, and kind of posterior part of the mandible there as well. So the body and the ramus are here, the angle is down here, and that's something that you should be able to feel on your own mandible as well. Now then if we come over to the temporal bone, we can see here an opening. That's the external acoustic meatus, and just behind and below that is the mastoid process. And that might be better visible if I just tilt the skull like that, and that's the mastoid process just there. Then if we look at a superior point of view, down on the top of the skull, how well can we see them here? They're not too bad if we go close up, but what we've got is a suture or a join between the bones running right along here. That's the sagittal suture, so it's in between the two parietal bones. And then the one that you can see here, this squiggly line running across here, is the coronal suture. Now I'm not convinced that that was a brilliant view of those, so let's have a look quickly back to the coloured skull where you can see those joins much more easily. So here between the two green parietal bones is the sagittal suture, and here between the frontal bone and the parietal bones is the coronal suture. So those are the two sutures there that you need to know. Now then, with this model here, if we just remove the top of the skull, we can see the internal surface here, where we've got a couple of features to have a look at. The Crista Galli first is just here, and it's just a little ridge. If I turn the skull around that way, a little ridge just here in the midline. Then we have the hypophyseal fossa, which is this depression in here where the pituitary gland sits, and then of course we have the large round foramen magnum that the spinal cord goes through, and naturally we can see that from an inferior point of view as well. That's it there. And that's it for the skull.